Utilities Commission. Ann and I are here. And how about the consent agenda? Let's consider that. I had one question on the bills about George Lugalis and Sons, capital outlay improvement,
Mm-hmm.
$33,000.
Yep, that is the final payment for the force main repair,
Okay.
which was up by the HDC building.
And what's the total amount of that repair going to be, approximately?
Oh, it was 230,000,
Mhm.
something in there.
I noticed in the budget that there was a one in 2017 that was about 200,000.
Yeah, I think it was 18.
Okay.
And that was that. But that wasn't just, it wasn't just that, it was also the temporary that we had set up to bypass the break while we were figuring out how to fix it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'd like to ask about the first three payments to MnDOT.
What page are you on, Ann?
Page 1 of the payments.
Yeah. Okay.
Is this customary to pay $2 million so far ahead of when the work is actually going to be done?
I don't think there's, customary is not a word I'd use to describe this project.
Okay.
It's what is required.
And why is that on our budget?
Because there's a lot of utility work included in the project.
But this doesn't show up in our budget information, or does it? How does it show up in our budget information?
So we talk about capital budget in each of the different memos.
Right.
And when you look at the capital budget for, let's just start with water, since that's the first one. You can see the sources that we use to fund our capital budget. You can see the existing debt commitments. You can see the remainder, which is accumulating. And you can see then a list of things that we're going to use it for in the future. That's how it's covered in this document. When we actually look at the capital improvement plan, then you'll see those same projects that are listed here and the amount that we expect them to cost, the amount of cash that we're planning on using for them, the amount of debt that we think that's going to be required for them. And that's where you'd see information that would probably be a little closer related to what's going on here. So this Highway 61 project is something that we've talked about in previous budgets, probably the past 3 or 4 years now, as one of the things that we're accumulating capital reserves to pay for, and that we're intending to pay cash for it.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I understand that, and that we're accumulating cash to pay cash for it, but can you explain where that policy comes from, that we have to pay that much money way before anything happens?
We are doing this work in cooperation with MnDOT. The work's actually being done by MnDOT under MnDOT's contract. So they're hiring the contractor to do the work, rather than a separate contractor working for the city working on MnDOT's job site.
Okay.
It's the way MnDOT would prefer it. We have a contract with MnDOT that It describes the different parties' responsibilities, MnDOT's responsibility to do the construction administration and everything else, and our responsibility to pay for things. And that contract says we pay up front before the work is done, before they even let the bid, really. So that's why. That's not how we normally do our own projects. But we didn't give this money to a contractor, we gave it to MnDOT, so.
Right, no, I understand. Okay.
Yeah, and your concern is that it's just a long time before anything happens.
Yeah, and it's a lot of money.
Yeah, except that, I mean, I guess things are gonna be happening soon. But, yeah, and that's just the way it's done with MnDOT, generally?
You don't have a lot of leverage to have MnDOT change the way they like to do things.
Right.
So
There is no other
Our
state
options are
transportation
do it
department.
this way
Right.
or do it without MnDOT. And without
Mhm.
MnDOT means we're probably repairing the highway when we dig up the highway rather than doing it during their road construction project.
Okay.
Any
But
other-
that's for the entire project though, right? It's not just for the utilities portion.
No, that's just the utilities portion.
$2 million?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
What's the total contract?
2.9, 2.3 that we paid them up front, and a lot of grant money that's paying for the rest. I mean, the total of their project is
Yeah.
20 million.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. I just want to understand because we don't usually see such enormous checks on here.
Nope. No, that's the biggest one I've seen too.
Yeah. Anything else, Ann?
Oh,
Motion to approve the consent agenda?
so moved.
All in favor? Aye. Think we got that one, Hayden? So we looked at the electrical utility draft budget last month,
Mhm.
and now we're gonna look at the water and the sewer this month, and Mike, they're all kind of the same format.
They're all set up the same, so this should take no time at all to zip through here, right?
Let's go through.
With the water fund, I just start with, I don't think we need a rate increase, so let's take a look at why. You have some actual expenses here, and then the 2019 budget, and what we're proposing for the 2020 budget, and you can see in the water fund that the proposed budget is virtually the same as the 2019 budget. Let's see where the differences are. There's a slight increase in the personnel. We're intending to give our staff raises with that. Supplies budget is up a little bit. That's not related to any particular specific project, but it's just what Tom's put in here to make some purchases with. The services is up a little bit as well. That's paying for utilities and professional services. We don't have a lot of professional services we're expecting to use this for. There'll be some engineering costs for designing Fifth Avenue's water and sewer replacement for when that happens in 2023 or 4 or 5 or whenever the county does that. The depreciation number is up a little bit as we've added a few pieces to the asset pool, but it's about the same. And then the debt service is down a little bit because our share of the public works facility debt is smaller than we were budgeting for initially, and it just goes down every year unless you add debt because our interest payments go down as our debt gets older. And then the biggest end piece here, this capital reserve number in 2019, we had budgeted to add 50,000 to the capital reserve to pay for some of these future projects, and we've decreased that to 35 for 2020. Any questions about any of that stuff? It's really not a lot of difference.
Right.
It's about the same. The 2019 revenues versus the 2020 revenues, you can see, first of all, we are expecting the 2019 budget of $400,000 of revenues on utility bills to come in pretty close to that. And so that's also what we're anticipating in 2020. We're not predicting any significant changes in sales volume or amounts.
Yep.
The fees stay the same. There is a debt levy and special assessment that the city is collecting that we're using to pay one of the water debt for, and so you see that on the revenue side here. I'll bring that up again when we get to capital projects. And then miscellaneous is mainly interest on money we have, which has not been a significant amount for a long time. So you can see we're expecting about the same amount of revenues that we've got budgeted on the expense side, which is why I say I don't think we need a rate increase. We might consider a rate increase if we wanted to increase the amount we were setting aside for some of these projects. They are significant. We don't have budgets for them yet because none of them are going to happen in the next couple of years. So we haven't done any engineering for them yet. Something to think about, but at least just to operate in 2020. We're still setting aside a pretty significant amount for those projects. So let's take a look at how much that is on the next page.
Okay.
We have 238,000 of that 445 that we're using to fund our capital budget. So some of that's depreciation that's funded in the expense side. Some of it is debt service, and then there's the capital reserve amount. Of that 238,000, we're spending 176,000 on debt payments in 2020. So the remaining about 62,000 is available to accumulate to pay cash for future capital projects. Some of those projects would include meter improvements, the First Street reconstruction, and the Fifth Avenue reconstruction. Those are the big ones. We're going to be taking a serious look at water meter replacements in 2020. The electric meters will be done probably by the end of the year, but certainly before next season. And then we'll have our AMI communication system in place with all the electric meters. We'll be able to start talking about doing the water meters as well. The water and the sewer funds will both pay for the water meters since they both use water meters to track their expenses, the sales. The First Street reconstruction, this project is the one that we've had on the books for a while to come next when we do a street reconstruction. First Street is the road that is at the east end connected to the library, and it goes out to about 11th Avenue West, so about 9 blocks there. There's also a number of avenues connected to it that may or may not be included when we do finally scope this out. So we're not sure exactly what this is yet, but we do know that First Street is the next road that has the confluence of poor pavement conditions and older and poor conditions of water and sewer pipes, which is why it's the next one that we've got scheduled. We're just trying to get through the project we have now with the highway before we get into this. We also have some debt payments that are going to come off the books in 24-25 era, which be not kind of a natural time to pick up a new debt payment. So if this project, for instance, happened in 2023, and we did have to borrow money for it, which we would, then the payment would start in the 2024 budget about the same time as another payment's going away. That's kind of what we're looking at now, schedule-wise, but that's still far enough out that next year we might start doing that scoping, but we don't have to pay for that yet. That'll be a big project.
This is the Fifth Avenue one you're talking
No, I'm
about.
talking about First Street.
You're still on First Street, okay.
First Street, that, let's say it's 9 to 15 blocks of reconstruction could easily be a $5 million project by the time we're done. So that one will take up a lot of space in terms of our budget and also in terms of just our ability to deal with it administratively. Fifth Avenue is not as big. It's only, there's 5 blocks of Fifth Avenue that are included in this from the highway up to County Road 7. The utilities above County Road 7 and Fifth Avenue were reconstructed about 10 years ago, so they're in good shape. There is some major water lines that feed our reservoirs that go through Fifth Avenue. And there's also quite a few sewer lines that are in poor condition that every once in a while you see we put a new patch on the road. That's us doing that, not the county, and it's because we're doing some kind of repair on a water or sewer line. So we're just waiting for the county to get their road reconstruction project going, and when they do, we'll also reconstruct the utilities underneath that road. It's not quite as big a project for us because it's not our road, and that's a big piece of it, but the 5 blocks of water and sewer will still be hundreds of thousands of dollars for sure for us. And that's not scheduled yet. The county's still working on it. That could also be that same 2023-ish time frame, and if so, we might be doing 5th Avenue / 1st Street. Who knows? We'll find out. There's other things on the list there, but they're not as big in scope, and they can kind of fit in when we decide they're appropriate. So the special assessment and debt levy pays for a 2004 loan that we received from the Public Facilities Authority, which is a state of Minnesota program that does grants and loans for water systems, and this one was the reconstruction of the downtown water mains. So this loan with the special assessments and property tax levy is how we've been paying for it, not with water revenues. However, we probably have enough water revenues to pay for it. Since then, we've shifted away from ever using special assessments or property taxes to pay for reconstruction of utilities. Instead, we've been collecting rates to do that. So it's an idea that the council's talked about is what if we shifted that to rates now? And this
Can
is
you
the
talk about the pros and cons of that?
Sure. So we're just talking about what source of money to use,
Right.
really. Our policy is to use rates to pay for the reconstruction of any utilities now, and it has been that way for quite some time, not all the way back to 2004, obviously. And the reason why that makes sense is because that's why we have a utility, right? That's what the rates are for, and we are capable of planning for using that money to do reconstruction. The special assessment, we'll talk about that first. That is the idea that there's an additional value added to an adjacent property by doing the reconstruction of the water mains.
Mhm.
Can certainly make that case logically. Legally, I think you'd have a harder time making that case. And imagine trying to prove that Sven-Only's value was increased by $30,000 because we replaced the water main that was old. It's hard to do.
Because there's kind of a level of expectation that the city utilities should work everywhere.
Well, I mean, there is that, right?
Right.
That only works if the users are funding a system
Right.
in order to have it happen.
Exactly.
And if the users fund it through rates or they fund it through special assessments, the only difference really is which users are paying for what.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than pick on specific targeted users to pay for specific projects with the water system or the electric or the sewer system, instead we do try to establish that expectation. We're going to fund that so that it works that way. It just you have it and it's going to work, and when we need to replace it, we will.
Mm-hmm.
And your rates are paying for it, and so are your neighbors, and so are everybody else's. So that's why I would say this is something worth considering. The property tax is the same idea. In this case, though, the debt levy is paid by the entire city. So the difference between using that and using rates is the people whose property values and classifications are higher are paying more for that project than the people whose are lower, versus the people who use more water are paying more for that project than people who use less. So that's just it's a philosophical difference. There wouldn't be a super big difference in people's experience other than, we wouldn't be talking about raising water rates, for instance, to do this. We'd just use that difference that we've already got, and
Right.
rather than accumulate it in this fund, we'd just pay the debt. And then now the general fund side of things would actually get a little bit nicer. So somebody's property tax bill might get lower because there won't be a special assessment or there won't be a property tax payment for this project on it. But a water bill might be, maybe we'd lower the water rates instead of doing this. So it's just deciding what sources to use.
Has the 2004 loan got much time left on it?
It's the one that'll be done in that 2024-25
So
timeframe.
A few more years.
So there's a few more years.
Okay. Well, I guess I'd kind of defer to what you thought and what the council thought,
Okay.
so.
Well, it's not, making that decision is not important to understanding this budget or deciding what the rates
Just
are.
that it
so.
might happen or might not, and.
Well, and you'll get a say in it too, but I think that it's appropriate to use water money to pay for that debt.
Yep.
So that's kind of what I'd lean towards.
Yep, sounds good.
Any questions about any of the capital side of things there?
Well, let's go through the sewer, and it's kind of the same
It is,
at the end, right?
well, the same type of conversation at the end.
Yeah,
The
same
sewer,
projects.
I actually am recommending an increase. We've done more increases in sewer than in water. The sewer fund has had a history of collecting a lot of cash too, because a big chunk of the money's been depreciation, whereas that's really risen up more in water in the past few years. So the sewer fund's had, $1.5 million, $2 million in cash sitting in the banks every once in a while. In the past 5 years, we've started to use that. We've paid off a bond early with some of that money. And then, of course, you just saw the $800,000 payment is sewer money. So that came out of their funds for the MnDOT project. So although it's performed well cash-wise, in terms of accrual-wise, it hasn't performed as well because it's actual operating at a loss every once in a while. So we're accumulating cash but showing a loss on the books. If anybody really wants to dig into that more, we can. But if you just take my word for it, that I'm suggesting we increase it by 2% for 2020, and we'll look and see why. So a lot of bigger issues happening in the sewer side of things than in the water side of things. Other than the reconstruction projects that we've talked about, you can actually see some of the, we have to fix something projects happening here in the sewer side. So in 2018, we got $573,000 in services, and a big chunk of that is a force main that broke and that we needed to bypass, and that was $80,000 to bypass it. So setting up a force main on the surface that we operated through the winter while we were trying to figure out what to do with this thing. Then, digging it up and fixing it, which was the $230-some thousand to do that as well. So a lot of that's sitting in that 2018 actual. The year before, actually, at $280,000, we had already had a note in that's quite a bit higher than it normally has been. So you can see the 2019 budget was $240,000. That's actually what we expect for our normal services in the sewer fund. And the biggest chunk of that is taking the biosolids that the sewer plant has processed and bringing them to Duluth. That costs us $80,000+ a year to do that. So that's a big chunk of that number.
And again, for this 2019 services budget, does the most recent main that broke, is that number being exceeded, the actual services expense? Is that quite a bit more than the 239?
I'm not sure where it's actually at right now. I don't think it's going to be a lot more because most of that money was paid in 18 for that fix. So
Okay.
this was a final payment, and I think that really the work was done some months ago in the spring. The first thing in the spring, they had to come back and do some paving that they couldn't do in the wintertime.
Okay,
And so
so there's only been one, that we're talking about the same.
the Bugalis bill that you asked
Yeah.
about, that is the force main repair. And as far as I know, that's the only one we've paid in 2019.
Okay.
The 2017 number we had noted, though, that included some work on mercury regulations. So we're talking about attorneys and engineers. And we know that we're going to do some more work on that in 2020. We have our engineers are going to be doing the odor evaluation project for us. So that type of thing, we don't really have a lot of engineering that we're planning on doing in the water plant, but we have quite a bit that we have been and probably will continue to do in the sewer plant.
So you have money in there for engineers to deal with the odor situation. Is
Yes.
there money in there for possible equipment we might need to purchase?
We have that. It's not in the expense budget because we'd capitalize that stuff if we
Okay.
needed to, so we would add it to the second page here.
Okay.
So just zipping through the rest of this budget, you can see the personnel is up again, supplies is a little bit down, services is about flat, depreciation is flattish, and then this debt service capital reserve number, you can see the same thing happened again. Our debt service is down pretty substantially at this point in the sewer fund because we paid off one of the bonds and because its share of the public works bond is a little bit lower than we had originally budgeted. So that's why we're adding this capital reserve to make sure that we don't, since all those numbers are going down, we don't want our sources for capital projects to go down quite that fast because we've got quite a few capital projects on the horizon. So it's just a little bit higher, 680,000 versus 670,000 budgeted this year. If you look at the revenues, the actual what we collected on our utility bills and fees was 572,000 in 2018. That we're thinking that 2019 is probably going to run pretty close to that as well. So the 2019 number, 565 plus the 17,000 that we had budgeted for a rate increase this year that we've got there. So we're planning on getting about $585,000 in 2019 in utility bills with the sales and the rate increase that was included there. If we have another 2% rate increase on top of that, that'd be that 11,000 on the bottom number. The fees, you can see they've kind of fluctuated over time, and that's really development fees more than anything else. We collect $1,000 per residential unit for water and for sewer each. And we've had quite a few, 2017 and 18, that was one roof housing was the biggest chunk of that. And so that's not a sustainable amount, so we don't plan on that for paying for our operations.
So you're thinking in 2020 there could be 7 new?
It would be, no, probably, 4 or 5 for sure.
Okay.
And then some other things that just get paid for, and their hookup fees are $300 each. And the gray water leach sludge, we do accept a lot of sewage that's not just our customers using it. So G&G Septic has a facility in the business park where they process septage from throughout the county and then put it into our system, and they have to pay kind of a special rate for that because it's not your standard sewage.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little heavier for us to deal with. We also collect gray water from a few different sources, including some, coal ash places, so that we've looked there, for instance, is this one of the sources of any mercury that we might have in our water, and it's actually lower than groundwater in terms of the amount of mercury that's in it. So our own groundwater, so it's like, oh, that's not it. It's just when you're dealing with parts per trillion, you don't even have to know what the source is because it's just mind-boggling numbers. The total budget, we're imagining at about 690,000, so you can see that's just a little bit higher than the expense side of things. But I think that we're going to need it. So let's talk about the capital budget and why. Depreciation at 140, debt service and capital reserves at about 50. So we've got this $190,000 of money available to use for things. Right now we have 125 of that spoken for debt payments. The 2013 refunding, some of that money is also going to be done around that same 24, and most of it will be gone in about 27. So it's a big chunk of where this money's going. That we've got 65,000 there, plus the other 10 that's difference between our revenues and expense that we can use to pay for capital projects, which seems like a lot, but we spent 300,000 fixing a water or a force main that broke that we didn't budget for, and we spent 800,000 on replacing some sewer mains that we were hoping was going to cost half that or less. So we're starting to think maybe we need to squeeze a little more room out of this capital budget when we talk about First Street and Fifth Avenue reconstructions. Any questions on that stuff?
Not for me.
No, I mean, seems like you've been pretty diligent about keeping a good cushion financially, and really keeping up the reserves, so that you were able to deal with these issues as they come up. And I guess I'm very supportive of that,
Yeah,
because
definitely.
the alternative would be painful. So yeah, this looks really good to me. I appreciate that approach. And yeah, and that's a fairly modest rate increase. What was the electric rate increase proposal again?
I don't think we need one.
It was 0.
Yeah.
Okay, so 0 in electric, 0 in water, and 2% in sewer.
Right. So
Which
in
is-
December,
Yeah.
we'll look at the capital improvement plan. And then I think you should be able to make some final decisions about rates for 2020 after you've seen that piece. So we'll look at how much our reserves are right now and what we think the projects are going to cost and what we were planning on using of reserves for them and what we were planning on borrowing to pay for them. And, those numbers are sketchy. They're just
Mhm.
estimates at this point, but it gives us an idea anyway.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
What's next?
Your memo.
Should we go on to the memo? Yeah, I was just looking for a way to make some progress with the climate action plan. And I talked to Mike about how that might happen, and kind of just came up with a list of things that I thought might be appropriate to kind of get going. And I was hoping you and Tim could kind of, we could discuss that a little bit and come up with a shared vision for how to do that. I think one thing that had come up in our conversation, Mike, was that you thought there needed to be some sort of decision made by the PUC to prioritize decarbonization steps or climate action plan implementation. Do you feel that should be in the form of a resolution?
No. No, prioritize is more than just say it's a priority. Like, you have to decide it's more important than other things that are happening, or you have to decide to add more resources to put towards it.
And I was wondering,
So,
excuse me,
yeah.
I was wondering if we could just take a small step back and talk about what a decarbonization fund is.
Sure, and I think even prior to that, though, I think what Mike is saying is, that was just one kind of component. But the idea of making decarbonization and progress on the climate action plan, making that a priority, how do we do that? I mean, I guess I feel like, probably the primary priority for PUC is safety. And then you get into reliability and affordability. And I guess I would think decarbonization would be right in the mix, in the balance with those sorts of priorities.
Well, I mean, that's your prerogative to decide as a board where you want it to be in that mix. I don't think we have a written policy that says this is what our priority is. It's
Do we have a
safety.
mission statement?
No, we don't have a mission statement.
Okay.
With the utility, that might be one of the pieces of city business where you might actually be able to write a mission statement because the mission's pretty clear, like we're providing a service and we know what it is and people can generally understand what it is. And that list that you described is probably what most people would have in some order or another on their list of what the job of the utility is. You know what, let's simplify this a bit because we're not talking about all the utilities here. We're really only talking about the electric utility, I think.
Fair,
I mean, it's
yeah.
the water's utility is not, decarbonization is not an issue for the water utility, really.
Right.
You know, that it, any more than it is for the streets department. Like, there are things that they can do, but it's not really something you'd say it's their job to figure out. Not sure that you can say that about the electric department either, but if that's what you want it to be, it can be a part of that plan. Maybe just taking another step back, though, and imagining what our current strategy is, or describing and coming to grips with that, because we have a climate action plan. We have put some resources towards its implementation, so just if we were going to want more, we should probably start with what we've got and see if that can be ramped up first. So we have a staff person whose job it was to help us develop the plan and whose job it is now is to help us implement the plan. We got some grant money to pay for that for 2 years. That's mostly spent at this point. And we've reapplied for more grant money to do that again for the next couple of years. And when we did that reapplication, one of the things we talked about, and this was more of a city conversation at this point, was how much time do we want that person to have, and should we have some of our own money in this if it's a priority, or are we relying on grants to fund it? And you know, McKnight's been a more than willing partner, and this is something that they've said is a priority for them, and we're somebody who's managed success on it, so I think they're happy to help us with it in the future. But if you want to do more, that strategy is the only one that I can see working.
To continue with what's being done.
To have staff people whose job it is to implement the climate action plan.
So when will we find out about that grant?
I'm not sure. I guess I thought maybe we would have already found out about it.
Okay.
Well, and could we move forward without that grant? And let's move forward with hiring staff. I mean, I guess what I hear you saying is the real step that we can take is to hire more staff to work on these issues.
Well, and the other piece of it that's important is to implement the climate action plan. So we made a plan, and we don't need to come back every month and come up with new things that we want to try.
Okay.
Like, we need to do what we said we were going to do. We have a plan.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that a little bit. I think if there's an opportunity, we should certainly do something. And the client, and the other issue, other thing I would say is within the climate action plan, it's very, very broadly written. I mean, it's hard to think of a decarbonization effort that isn't in there.
But there's priorities in there, and it's a strategy. It's not just a list. Like, these are the things that have to happen for this to work. And, you know, sticking with that strategy over an extended period of time seems like a better way to get this than not using it.
Okay. I'm okay with that.
So now the question is really one of how many resources do you want to use and how fast do you want to go to make that strategy happen?
Yes, I would like to go faster and use more resources. Do you need a resolution?
You need to be much more specific.
Well, you just said you had a plan already.
We have a plan. I mean,
And it was prioritized and everything. And has a strategy.
I mean, this gets back to what does it mean to be prioritized, right? Whose job is it to do it? Which resources are we using to fund it? The city council didn't prioritize it. You know, it's not on their list of things they said were my priorities. So they passed it, and we have a strategy to implement it, but they didn't prioritize it.
So would it be helpful at a future meeting for us to pull that plan out and look at it and pick out some things we think are priorities?
Well, it's got priorities.
That's what I thought. I mean, I thought we'd done.
All it needs is somebody to start working on them.
Which
When we've
again-
got somebody to start working on them. But he can't, I mean, he's not a full-time staff person.
Mhm.
He's not going to be in the office every day grinding away at it. So if you wanted to go faster, you should have more people doing that kind of thing. That's my recommendation. So if that's something you're interested in, we can put some ideas together and you can look at that.
Yeah.
Yes, please. I was just thinking is maybe we could actually start the process of hiring the staff, whether the grant comes through or not, because clearly we have the money for it.
Well, you can use the money that you have for it. I mean, there's other things you can use it for too. So I don't think it's like, hey, this is lying around, let's just go ahead and add more staff. If this is your priority and you want to say, I want to use these resources for it, that's a decision the Utilities Commission can make. And so if you want to say, we want a full-time staff person that's now implementing the climate action plan, I'll come back with some ways to get that done. You can look at those next meeting.
Okay.
And, you know, you want to tell me right now to start the hiring process, you can do that too, but I don't have any pieces in place. I mean, I don't know, is this going to be a city job or a contract job? What's it going to cost? How are we going to pay for it? Are we providing benefits? Who's it going to work for? I mean, there's just a lot of things I think that are worth spending some time thinking about before you'd make that type of decision.
Yeah, sure. Well, could you come back to us with a recommendation on those questions?
So how much you want to spend?
Well.
Or would a different question be, how much of a person's time do we want? Like the grant you applied for,
Yeah,
how much would that fund?
20 hours a week.
And there was a budget item in the electrical utilities budget
Yes.
for staff,
Yeah.
and would that be appropriate for that to apply here?
It's not what its original intent was, but you could be related in some way to it. The electric department, we used to have 2 full-time people in the office, one of whom was our utility billing specialist. Now we have 1 full-time person in the office who does the utility billing stuff and the customer service city secretary stuff. That works fine, but there's just that little less cushion of administrative effort.
Mm-hmm.
We used to have an electric superintendent. We don't have an electric superintendent right now.
Yeah, so you're just saying that normal administrative work would be, that's what you had envisioned that position to do?
Well, the first was, do we need more help just doing normal administrative work? And right now, we don't think so, but we might change our mind about that. The second one is, do we need managerial assistance in the electric department?
Mhm.
Because we don't have a superintendent right now. We haven't needed it to operate. We're doing fine operating, but in terms of long-term planning, that's still something that's lacking.
Mhm.
And then the third thing I'd say was set aside for, and this is probably the first thing in the electric department's mind though, is it would be nice to have another line worker, because having 2 means if one of them's gone, we can't have a crew. So if we have 3, now one of them can be gone and we can have a crew.
Okay,
And
so that
it's
item
also
in the-
like we need to add an apprentice at some point, because we want to continue to have locally trained line workers that can work here. That's kind of what that was set aside for. So if we took forget about the line worker, forget about the managerial side of things, and we added some more administrative help, you could say that's what that money's for. I mean, right now it's in the budget and it's not being used, so.
Could that person take on, say, half-time or a quarter-time on climate action plan implementation?
They could take on all full-time on it. We're operating without them right now, so.
Mhm. Right, but I don't want to, I mean, if that person is needed for what, the range of things you just mentioned.
Well, the range of things isn't a person, right? There isn't a person that can do all of that. That's like 3 totally different concepts.
Right.
That takes 3 different skill sets and experiences. So this is more about picking one and walking away from the other 2 without funding them with different money.
Okay.
So that's okay to do that. I mean, to have it sit there and never use it is kind of silly too.
So it seems to me that where we're at here is that you need to decide how you would structure the city administration to move quicker on the climate action plan. With the idea that the PUC would like you to do that. Are we clear that the PUC would like him to do that?
I'm clear. Yeah.
And you want me to use the money that's in the electric fund that's set aside right now for additional staff?
I think that's a good starting point.
Okay.
And I mean, I guess, we're in the midst of a budget process, so, if as you work on this, you decide that maybe the budget, maybe we do need a rate increase to fund climate action plan implementation. That would make sense to me.
I don't
And
think
that-
we're going to. I mean,
You're going to solve climate change and not raise the rates?
well, we have, we're not going to solve climate change, so let's start with that, right? We're not going to do that.
Well, I disagree, but go
I mean,
on.
me and you are not going to do that.
I get it, yeah.
All the ratepayers in Grand Marais aren't going to do it. But if we're going to work on our own climate action plan, we don't have to raise rates to add a staff person because it's already included in the budget. The other thing to remember about some of the other items here that might be different money is that our debt payments are done in 2023 in the electric department, and substantial debt payments, $250,000 a year worth of debt payments.
Mhm.
So there's a lot more room coming in that budget that we either have to set aside for other capital projects or other capital ideas. So I just don't see the need to increase rates right now in the electric department.
Okay. And I don't
Even
want
to-
to increase rates.
Even to increase efforts.
Right.
I want to increase efforts.
Yep.
Okay. Mike, any of these other, these items that I mentioned, are there any of them things that you think are appropriate to kind of proceed with at this time?
Is
Well, I'm
this-
not going to answer that question, but you get to decide if they're.
I get to decide that?
But
We-
the board is. But I do want to the question that I asked you when you came to talk to me about this decarbonization fund is what's its intent? Is it a political statement? Is there a list of projects that you want to use it for? What do we need it for?
Yeah, and I'm foggy on that too.
Okay, well, that makes 3 of us. I think the idea was to make a political statement that it is a priority. Also, what it would fund would be, various climate action plan implementation steps. I mean, there's lots of them that, call for increased renewable energy development. How do we do that? Well, maybe we could incentivize that.
I mean, other things to think about that I brought up when you asked me about this. And you've brought up the idea of, do we have a rider on the bill that's funding this as a set aside? So is everybody putting in a percentage? Are we adding a 5% increase that's going towards this? All that stuff. And then what's worth thinking about from a board side is, are we going to pay for projects based on what we accumulate, or are we going to try and accumulate based on what we want to do for projects? Either way could work, but we should decide. And if we're having a fund and we're saying we only want to use that fund to pay for this stuff, then we potentially, it could add pressure either to we're accumulating more than we need and we end up doing things that we probably wouldn't have done, or we're not accumulating enough and we've got an opportunity that we can't fund. That what we would do without this set aside is, probably more flexible. But unless there's a list of we need to save for these things, and they're big, and if that exists, then put it in the capital improvement plan. And if we want to put a label on it for political reasons or for transparency or for whatever reason you want to do that, we can do it. But it's
So-
more important to identify what the projects are.
Well, I just want to ask to be clear to me and any citizens who might be following this. Could somebody just give a hypothetical example of something that would be paid for through the decarbonization fund? Like just,
A large-scale PV project that could be funded, number 6 down there on
okay,
the
that's
list.
what I was thinking. Okay.
Or number 5, the an incentivization program
Uh-huh.
for EV chargers.
That's where I was going, but I just wasn't sure if that's what you meant. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I think we're talking about. And the climate action plan boiled down to really high-level stuff is we're going to electrify is one of our strategies. And so any sort of project like that where we're trying to change people's fuel source to electricity, we might use that money for. And then decarbonize. So anything we might have to do through SIMPA to help them decarbonize our electricity source, we might use that money for it.
Or any local renewable energy development. As difficult and uncost effective as that is. Well, is that maybe what I hear you saying, Mike, is maybe we should put that off until we think more about the projects that we want to go forward with?
Well, I wouldn't know what to tell you right now in terms of how much you should put in that fund or how quickly it should accumulate. So I just have no idea what we're going to use it for.
Any clarity on that, Ann?
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, I think that I think a larger scale PV project could have a bigger impact than electric vehicle charging. I'd like to see us aim at that before.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's complicated because, in a sense, a large-scale PV project is, well, I mean, it's a direct decarbonization, but, those kilowatt hours are still quite a bit more expensive than, utility
Yeah,
scale.
from SIMPA, yeah.
If SIMPA can decarbonize quickly, the better strategy, dollars-wise, might be to try to electrify. And I don't know the answer to that.
Or number
But it's
three,
really complicated.
the intensify engagement with SIMPA and try to encourage them to,
Yeah, and that's not really, I mean, you can't put a lot of money into that.
no.
Oh, yeah,
Well,
you can.
it's time. I mean, it's, I would guess it's staff time.
ya?
I mean, when
Yeah.
you're sending me a monthly meeting, that's a
Right.
lot of resources.
Right.
It's
And-
not just that, mileage.
Yeah.
It's,
I didn't mean
it's
that we'd
also,
literally be throwing money at them, but I mean, it costs money to advocate.
Mhm.
yeah, and it costs money to replace what I was doing. So,
So it's not clear what the best thing to do is, and so my kind of feeling is let's kind of push where we can, push all the levers we can to a reasonable extent as we can do it. Are we out of here at 4?
All right.
Okay, well, let's wrap it
Can-
up.
Can I give a very brief commissioner's report?
You
I
may.
reached out to Nancy Kelly regarding the possibility of her providing something for individuals and people who are in residences as opposed to businesses. I haven't heard when one of the next times she's in town.
Oh, okay, for energy efficiency
Yeah.
work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think she'll be here next week. I think.
Okay, I haven't heard back from her, but just so you know, that's happening.
Yeah, okay, great.
Okay.
Good, thank you for following through on that.
Okay.
Clear enough, Mike? Thank you. Okay, we'll adjourn.
All right.
Make room for the next.